Shadow at the Station. I stood in the shadow of the old, abandoned station and finally realized that none of those who had disappeared here ever left by choice. And it wasn't the place itself. I came for answers, but when I got them, I understood. The scariest questions are those that will never have answers. Chapter 1. The abandoned station. I've always felt that some places are just not meant for people. They're not just old buildings or forgotten corners of cities. They're places where time seems to stand still, where the air feels thick and the shadows hide in the most unexpected corners. The station I found myself at was one of those places. It lay on the edge of town, long abandoned, with no one knowing exactly when the last train had passed. Quiet, neglected, like the world itself had forgotten it. I came here not by chance. For the past few months, I couldn't shake one thought. Missing people. They had vanished from this place, and no one knew where they went. What was strange was that all of them left their belongings behind, their traces, but they disappeared as if they had dissolved into thin air. No signs of a struggle, no proof that they'd left the station willingly. I knew I had to find out what had happened, and here I was. As I walked into the dark vestibule, the silence was suffocating. It felt as if something invisible was closing in on me. I thought maybe I was overthinking things, but the unease was too real. I kept moving forward. The building looked like it hadn't seen people in decades. Dust everywhere, old carriages on the tracks, forgotten and abandoned like toys. I stopped by one of the doors, barely visible in the dim light. Suddenly, a shadow flickered before me. I froze. A shadow, moving by itself, sliding across the wall, then disappearing. I wanted to believe it was just a play of light, but something in my gut told me otherwise. I wasn't alone. Chapter 2. Disappearances. Each disappearance at this station started the same way. People traveling through often stopped to wait for the next train or spend the night. And it was always then, when the night swallowed the light, that they vanished. The missing left behind strange traces. Liza, for example, a young journalist, came here to investigate the strange disappearances. She told her colleagues she was going to stay overnight at the station to figure out what was going on. She wrote her thoughts in a journal, but the morning train couldn't find her. Her last journal entry: I think I hear footsteps. Someone's near, but I can't see them. They don't speak, but I feel their gaze. This place isn't just a station, it's hiding something bigger. Something alive? Liza wasn't the only one. Once, an entire family disappeared. They had stopped at the station on their way home. The parents sat on a bench, and the kids played nearby. The parents left for just a moment, and were gone. The kids said they saw dark figures take them. These words were never proven, but they stayed in my mind like shadows chasing me. I found more strange records and documents related to these disappearances. It felt like an ancient warning. The more I read, the more questions arose. I started to understand that the station wasn't just abandoned. It was something more than a place. It was something that drew people in, something that consumed them. Chapter 3. The Station as a Maze. Hours passed. The station consumed me with its eerie silence. I examined every detail, trying to understand what was wrong with this place. Abandoned things, crooked signs, doors that led nowhere. I decided to go down into the basement where, according to rumors, old archives were kept. It was dangerous, but I knew the answers might be down there. The corridor was narrow and damp. The walls seemed to swallow the light. Suddenly, I stopped. I felt someone watching me. A figure flickered in the dark. I stepped back, but the figure was gone. I was alone again in the dim hallway, or so I thought. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Then I reached the deepest part of the tunnel, a door marked with the same symbol I had seen in the records. It was a symbol drawn by hand, not like the other signs I had seen at the station. I had to open it. I don't know why, but I felt like it would lead me to the answers. I grabbed the handle, and the door creaked open. A dark corridor lay behind it, covered in cobwebs. Suddenly, I felt cold. The air wasn't just cold. It was strange. I stepped forward. Chapter 4. The Secret. Behind the door. Expanded version. The moment the door opened, it became the most crucial moment of my life. Behind it was not just a storage room or an ordinary empty space. It was something else. A place that defied logic and had no clear boundaries, as if the very space was alive, existing by its own laws, independent of anything I knew. The walls twisted and vibrated, and every step I took seemed like a violation of something ancient and forbidden. The light from my flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, illuminating only fragments of this nightmare-like world. The air felt thick, heavy, unlike any ordinary dust or dampness. It was a feeling that the space itself was resisting me, as if every breath and step I took might awaken something far worse than fear. I focused harder. As I continued, the space grew even stranger. It felt like the walls weren't just standing still. They seemed alive, shifting. As strange as it sounded, they seemed to move. In one corner, I noticed an old painting, dusty and worn by time. It depicted a person, someone who seemed to be watching me. Their eyes were too lifelike. They stared directly at me. I felt my throat tighten, and a wild sense of panic began to take over. I closed my eyes, pushing the feeling aside, and continued forward. But suddenly, I heard it. A noise. It was faint, barely audible, but I heard it. Footsteps. Someone was walking behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. I didn't stop. I gave myself a command to move forward. The door behind me was not the only exit. Farther in the depths of the room, there was another opening, a barely noticeable crack in the wall. It was as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped closer and peered into the darkness. The blackness was so thick that I couldn't tell where the wall ended and the emptiness began. Then I realized I couldn't leave yet. I had to know what lay behind this door. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something stronger. I reached out, touching the cold surface. As I pulled the metal handle, the air around me compressed once again, as though the whole station was waiting for me to open the door. I felt the cold engulf me when the door creaked open. It wasn't just an opening. It was an entry into another world, into some forgotten space. I stepped inside. My flashlight illuminated an old, abandoned room. But it was immediately clear that this was not a typical room. Scattered all around were strange, ruined items, ancient books, broken clocks, magazines, forgotten letters. Everything was covered in dust, and these objects seemed attached to this place, as if they hadn't been simply abandoned, but deliberately left here. And then I felt it. The power. The dark power. This wasn't just an old storage room. It was something more. More than just a station. This was a zone that distorted reality, altered perception. As I took a few steps further, I noticed strange symbols scratched into the wall. They didn't make sense, but there was something sinister in their lines. I took another step forward, and suddenly I heard the footsteps again. Not mine. These steps echoed in the room. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was familiar. It was the same voice I had heard earlier when I was being pursued by the shadow. It didn't sound like a living person, but something that might have been, but wasn't. I turned sharply, trying to find the source of the sound, and then I saw it. It was a figure standing at the far end of the room. It was like a shadow, but far more tangible. The creature began to approach me, but the closer it got, the more it dissolved, like smoke, as if it had been made from the very darkness. "You broke the taboo," it said again, but now the voice was a whisper, cold and harsh. I tried to retreat, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed. Suddenly, everything around me began to twist. The walls started to bend. The ceiling was compressing. It felt like an unimaginable trap. The space was shrinking, and I realized that I would likely never escape. But before I could understand what was happening, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Chapter 5. The Return of the Lost. I opened my eyes and immediately felt that I was no longer in the same place. I had found myself in another corridor. This wasn't just a station. It was something much stranger. The surroundings had changed. I was surrounded by people. In their eyes, there was no life. They were part of this place. They had become part of the shadow, like all the ones who had disappeared before me. I started to realize that this station didn't just consume people. It took their souls, making them stay here forever. Those who were once alive became shadows in these corridors. I began to understand that now I too had become part of this place. Chapter 5. The Return of the Lost. I opened my eyes and immediately felt that I was no longer in the same place. I had found myself in another corridor. This wasn't just a station. It was something much stranger. The surroundings had changed. I was surrounded by people. In their eyes, there was no life. They were part of this place. They had become part of the shadow, like all the ones who had disappeared before me. I started to realize that this station didn't just consume people. It took their souls, making them stay here forever. Those who were once alive became shadows in these corridors. I began to understand that now I too had become part of this place. The dark figure approached me again, and when I looked into its empty eyes, I saw everything that had happened here, every disappearance, every trace left behind in the past. And then I understood. I was the one creating these shadows. Chapter 6. The Truth of the Station. I was no longer human. I had become part of the darkness. My soul was consumed by the station, and now I was part of its sinister force. I understood that all those who disappeared here eventually became the ones who served its dark power, bound to this place to allow it to continue existing. My consciousness began to fade, but at some point I realized, even if I became a shadow, even if my soul was consumed by this place, I would still keep searching for answers. And perhaps the next shadow that enters here will also search, but they won't find them, because there are no answers here, only darkness.